Graham Mercer adjusted his tie for the third time, staring at the pristine stack of papers in front of him. Today was supposed to be simple. Sign the divorce, shake hands, close a chapter that had been dragging on for 3 years. The 62nd floor of Mercer Tower offered a view of Manhattan that could make anyone forget their troubles, but Graham couldn't. Every tick of his platinum watch sounded like a countdown to an unknown disaster. His office smelled faintly of polished wood and leather, but it didn't calm the storm in his chest. He had prepared for confrontation, for anger, for awkward silence, but not for the unexpected. The intercom buzzed, and his assistant's voice sounded unusually tight. "Mr. Mercer, she's here." Graham's heart skipped. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind, but the reality always felt heavier. The door opened, and there she was, Lena Hayes, not the carefree, bright-eyed woman he remembered, but someone who had clearly endured more than he could imagine. Behind her, a double stroller peeked into the room, and his breath caught. 2 small faces stared up at him, dark eyes filled with curiosity and trust. His voice faltered. "Lena, who are?" She smiled faintly, but her eyes were serious. "Noah and Eli," she said softly. "Your sons." For the first time in years, Graham felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel, pure, unfiltered fear and awe all at once. And then she added words that made the air in the office thicken. "One of them needs surgery tonight." Suddenly the divorce papers seemed meaningless. Everything had changed in a single heartbeat. Graham's legs felt weak as he sank into his chair, staring at the 2 boys. Noah and Eli, his sons, tiny reflections of himself, yet with Lena's quiet strength in their eyes. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt so utterly powerless. Lena's voice cut through the haze, calm but firm. "The doctors called this morning. Noah's condition is serious. He needs surgery tonight or..." She didn't finish the sentence, and Graham didn't need her to. The weight of those words pressed on him harder than any business deal, any skyscraper he'd built. For 3 years he had avoided responsibility, avoided the messiness of life outside numbers and contracts, believing it was easier for everyone. Now the reality he had run from was here, in the form of 2 small boys who depended on him. He reached out, trembling, touching Noah's tiny hand. The warmth of it, the softness of his skin, broke something inside Graham, a dam of regret, guilt, and unacknowledged love. Lena watched him quietly, waiting, giving him space to absorb the truth. Time seemed to stretch, every second louder than the tick of his watch. And in that quiet, the billionaire realized that wealth, power, and control meant nothing compared to the fragile life in front of him. Tonight everything would change. He had no choice but to face it. Graham could barely think, his mind racing faster than any deal he had ever closed. The divorce papers lay forgotten on his desk as Lena explained the hospital plan. Noah needed brain surgery tonight, and time was slipping like sand through his fingers. Graham's world had always been predictable: buildings, investments, contracts, but nothing in his controlled life had prepared him for this. He glanced at Eli, who reached for his father's hand with innocent trust, and Graham felt a surge of responsibility he couldn't ignore. Lena's calm, collected demeanor contrasted sharply with the storm inside him. She had carried the weight of these past years alone, yet here she was, showing courage that left him feeling small. "We need to get to the hospital now," she said softly, her voice steady but urgent. Graham nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. The elevator ride down felt eternal, the city bustling below oblivious to the private chaos ascending his chest. As they reached the hospital, Graham's heart pounded with fear and anticipation. Every step toward the emergency room felt like a test he couldn't fail, a trial where money, power, and influence meant nothing. This was life itself, fragile and unyielding, and he had finally realized what truly mattered. Tonight he had to fight, not for deals, not for glory, but for the son he had ignored for too long. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and tension, a sharp contrast to the polished calm of Mercer Tower. Graham followed Lena through the maze of hallways, each step heavier than the last. Nurses passed, eyes sympathetic but busy, and Graham suddenly felt painfully exposed, a man stripped of every shield he had ever relied on. In the waiting room, he sank into a chair, unable to tear his gaze from Noah, whose small hand was still wrapped in Lena's. The doctors had warned them about the risks, the uncertainty, but Graham's mind refused to absorb the statistics. All he could see was the boy with his eyes, the tiny life he had helped create, dangling between hope and fear. Lena stood silently beside him, her hand brushing his arm briefly, a gesture of shared worry, of quiet reassurance. Graham felt a wave of emotion he hadn't allowed himself in years: regret for the moments he'd missed, fear for what was ahead, and an overwhelming desire to protect these children at any cost. Time crawled, each second echoing louder than the tick of a billion-dollar clock. When the surgeon finally emerged, Graham's heart lurched. Every word that followed was a test of courage, a reminder that wealth could never buy safety, that love, commitment, and presence were the only currencies that truly mattered tonight. The operating room doors closed, leaving Graham and Lena in the sterile silence of the waiting area. Graham's hands trembled despite his attempts to steady them. For once, there was no contract to review, no business decision to control, only the fragile life of his son hanging in the balance. Lena sat beside him, her presence a steadying anchor, though her own worry was etched in every line of her face. "He's strong," she whispered, as if speaking it aloud could summon courage into the room. Graham nodded, swallowing hard, realizing how much he had underestimated the weight of fatherhood. Memories of missed birthdays, bedtime stories never told, and silent mornings filled him with remorse, but they also ignited a determination he had never known. This wasn't about money, reputation, or success. It was about being there, fully and without hesitation. Hours dragged, each one stretching into eternity, until finally a nurse appeared, the kind of smile that offered both hope and relief. "The surgery went well," she said, and Graham felt his knees weaken, relief flooding through him in a way that no achievement ever had. Lena exhaled, tears pooling in her eyes, and Graham knew in that moment, life had reset its priorities. He would never take another second for granted. Not with Noah, not with Eli, and certainly not with the woman who had brought him back to what truly mattered. Noah slept peacefully in the hospital crib, monitors beeping softly, a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat of hope. Graham sat beside him, holding Eli close, the tiny weight of the boy grounding him in a way no boardroom ever could. Lena rested her head against his shoulder, exhaustion and relief mingling in the quiet. For the first time in years, Graham felt truly present, aware of every breath, every heartbeat, every fragile moment. The divorce, the arguments, the years of absence, they all felt meaningless compared to this. He had chased success, built empires, accumulated wealth, but it had never touched his soul the way this moment did. The realization hit him with a force stronger than any deal he had ever closed. Family, love, and presence were the truest measures of life. He whispered promises to Noah and Eli, pledging to never let ambition blind him again, to be the father they deserved, and to support Lena in ways he had failed before. Outside, Manhattan's skyline glimmered, but inside the hospital room, Graham saw a new world, a world of hope, courage, and second chances. He had walked into that divorce meeting expecting closure. Instead, he found purpose, responsibility, and a love that would shape the rest of his life. Tonight had changed him forever, teaching him that some of life's greatest victories aren't measured in wealth, but in heart, resilience, and unwavering commitment.